scoping is done. And so we don't know yet anything about that, but it's something really important for us to study. And this is connected to a question that I think is really interesting, which is, why are they proposing this project here? Because as we've said, we know that the load in this region is, the peak load in this region is declining. We don't need this peak capacity here. Well, our air quality here in Ulster County has been improving in recent years to the point where in the last several years we haven't had any unhealthy air quality days at all. This is not true everywhere else in the state, and it's not true downstate where they really do need this, this additional peak capacity. So where the load is, the air quality is worse than ours, and it's much harder to get your air permits that you need to build a facility like this in places that the EPA has designated as having bad air quality. So this is a map of how many air quality, how many types of pollution your county is violating in terms of EPA standards. And you know, we're just in a remarkably clean place, which I think we all know intuitively. But that is literally why they are proposing this project here, because they think they can get the permits more easily here, because our air has room for pollution in it. So finally, why not build a storage-only project? As Bill mentioned, there's a lot of work going on right now to meet this really ambitious 1.5 gigawatt storage goal. Why on earth propose a project like this? I spoke with one of the people at NYSERDA who's managing the storage program, and we talked about this a lot, and his basic conclusion was 2018 is just an in-between year for New York State, where the storage technology is coming up and the market is coming up, but we don't quite have the market rules in place to make this project work. And the big issue there is that this project is proposed to play into this backup capacity market. And right now in New York State, the rules say if you're going to be backup capacity, you have to be available for as many hours as we want to call on you for. And this battery the batteries have limited capacity. And so if they were a storage-only project under the current rules, and they got called upon, and their batteries ran out during that period of time that they have to be available for, they would be like violating their contract for providing backup capacity service. And if they did that more than a few times, they would be kicked out of the market. And so what's needed is just to rewrite those rules so that storage projects have their own kind of niches that they can fit in. And this has been done in the New Jersey power market, it's been done in the California power market, so it's not like it can't be done, it just hasn't been done here yet. And in fact, NYSO is kind of furiously working on this right now and doing modeling and testing things, and there will probably be rules for this out early in 2019, and things getting finalized and refined over the next few years. So this project is just coming along a little bit too soon for that. The flip side of that is, if it should come to pass that the permitting process takes a year or two, then there might be a really different rule environment that might make this viable as a storage-only project. Now, GlidePath has never built a project like this before. They're a storage and renewables company. I don't really understand how they convinced themselves that this was a great thing for them to do in order to get into the New York State market, because their core business has not been fossil stuff. They've not built a fossil project before. So, you know, talking at CLP, we're hoping that it might come to pass that this whole thing will look differently, and this project might be restructured. I don't know if that's a pie in the sky hope or a viable hope, but you know, certainly it's in the case that in other states, as Carl said, storage is competitive with peaking plants. California's Public Utility Commission has told its utilities, don't come to us with another proposal for a gas-fired peaker plant until you've thoroughly evaluated the economics of storage. We want to see those. So that can happen here too. And this project right now is just unfortunately falling into this little gap where New York State is not quite ready for storage only. So that's what I've got to tell you. I'll turn it back over to John.
Hey, just to add one little point of emphasis, this also makes the point that I was saying before. This project is designed to connect to the big transmission grid, and that's why that's where those rules are so important. A completely different project, which would have different economics, that involve, instead of a 20 megawatt facility, involve 2,000 10 kilowatt storage devices in homes or businesses, would not be playing that game. It would also have a different set of money and all that sort of stuff. But that's the consequence of trying to connect a big project to the big grid. The rules are really, really strict right now, and they haven't been, as Bill said earlier, they haven't been, the system hasn't been designed for storage. That's what they're trying to go through. So
and I just want to mention, I mentioned this at the neighborhood meeting, but there was a major rule change in 2014 that basically made this project very profitable here, which was, the NISO and the FERC's solution to the downstate, the high demand, the growing peak demand problem was to fold our area, our load zone G, in the Hudson Valley, into New York City's capacity zone, where the prices are much higher, so that generators like this have an incentive to build peaker plants in our area and increase capacity. And so it's profitable. We've heard that this project could earn, just in capacity payments, $1 million a year. So there's the benefit of they get to pollute here, get the permits to pollute here, and they get paid for it. So that's the answer of why they are here. But there are, and I was just reading in Arizona's, I guess their equivalent of the Public Service Commission has a new plan. Basically, they're actively working to eliminate the need for gas-fired peaker plants and requiring that it hasn't been approved yet, but the plan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to replace that with storage. They have to come up with storage options first, and this is the direction that we need to go. So, and this is something that we need to advocate for. We'll just take questions at this point. Iris?
Oh, I have two questions. One is just, what is the latest thinking of Citizens for Local Power about whether we can defeat this project and how we can do that, and especially for people that may have missed the meeting on Friday night. And I have one other question. That's the one.
So we were talking about that, where it's it's going to be a challenge. I will don't want to minimize that challenge, just because of my understanding, at least, of Ulster's zoning. It's a by right zone, industrial zone, where this has been proposed.
No, it's not an industrial zone, it's manufacturing and office.
There's no industrial zone there in the town of Ulster.
No.
So it's not by right then?
That is by right. That's a utility structure.
Oh, it's a utility, right.
They could put that.
So utilities, that's right. Utilities are, right, are an exception to zoning.
What, exception from zoning?
Yeah, so, so it presents a challenge to the board. You have to really demonstrate that there's significant, and I'm not talking about the public pressure side of things. That's a whole different strategy. But in terms of avoiding a lawsuit from a municipal perspective, they have to have a really good reason to say no to a project that's by right. So you know, that's why looking at the emissions is really important in this secret review process, and the emissions of things like nitrous, you know, all of those other, sulfur dioxide, all of those other pollutants that they haven't given any information about. There is just the delay, you know, the delay in the project, you know, until and pressuring for changes in the rules. It's not going to be easy because, I mean, Bill can probably talk about this and the work that needs to be done in terms of changing the rules for storage in ISO markets. I don't know how, I don't know if it's possible to expedite it. I would love to see this project take advantage of, or this company take advantage. I mean, there's just going to the company and the public opposition of having this kind of project in the neighborhood. But we now have storage targets in New York State. My understanding is this is storage on the distribution system, not on the transmission system. Is that correct? The distribution projects?
Well, it is advanced storage, but I mean, to the point Jen just made about the timing for the ISO, the ISO rules are going to take years to change. They're in the process. They're working through it. The good news is that on the distribution system side, so we've been talking about this kind of cut point to high voltage transmission lines or what the local utility uses. On the distribution side, the rules are changing much faster. So the idea of being able to do something on the distribution side will happen faster, but for these larger projects, the ISO rules are going to take at least a couple of years to change.
So we want to, like, what are the incentives that NYSERDA can offer to make a standalone storage project beneficial to this company? You know, I mean, to meet those now, you know, supposedly very aggressive by national standards storage goals that we now have in New York State. You know, what can we do to get a company like GlidePath, which is, I mean, their bread and butter was storage, and storage combined with renewables. This is not a typical kind of project for them. So can they be enticed to do a different kind of storage project? And I just want to mention one other thing. The utilities in New York State were all required by the Public Service Commission to interconnect at least 2 storage projects on their substations by December 31st, 2018. So Central Hudson has 1 project identified so far, and they don't yet have another project identified. So I
would caution, I don't believe this would count toward that. Because that the rules for the PSC put for those 2 projects was that they had to benefit the local distribution network.
Right, so what I'm suggesting is they present a different kind of project that interconnects the distribution system and the substation rather than this project.
Let me just add one other point. So among the other things I've also done in my life is I've been involved as a solar developer and a wind developer. And in Texas, where the best places are hundreds of miles away. So it's a little bit of the situation from the load. A little situation where you've got, that Jennifer was mentioning, that you're in this load zone where the system tried to encourage the siting of energy resources here to serve downstate, right, and into the city. In terms of your campaign, just a little bit of advice is that everybody expects you to be against, right? But the question is, what could you be for? And I think the idea that we may be within a year or 2 of actually being able to be for clean energy, clean battery-only storage projects that would serve those high values without the cost of the natural gas pollution could be a pretty effective positive strategy that would get you away from just being against. So I want to encourage you to continue thinking about the fact that a battery project of that scale, 20 megawatts, or maybe even double it, make it to 40 megawatts and get rid of the gas, could be the kind of positive, clean energy, practically zero environmental footprint project that maybe you could communicate that you are welcoming of, right? That's more footprint to pay taxes and glad to help your downstate neighbors by selling them your overpriced power from up here. You know?
And does this company want to have its reputation in New York State? I mean, this is how it's trying to enter the New York markets. Does it want to enter, I mean, come on, it's the Hudson Valley. You don't find a more fracked gas constituency than right here in the Hudson Valley. This is where the birthplace of the environmental movement. So, if they want to break into the New York market, and they've done some great projects in other states, combined with renewables, do a project that demonstrates where we should be going instead of where we shouldn't be going.
Just from a timing perspective, that sort of roadmap draft for energy storage is going to be released this spring. So you're not that far off from when you can start to put out the things you could be for that Carl's talking about.
So, I just heard some questions from people who live right near this proposed plants, and one of them is do these battery storage pose any risk to our neighborhood? And so we need to have that addressed. And also the question was, couldn't you have a solar generating facility that dumps energy into these storage facilities rather than a gas-fired power plant? Are these like out of?
It's a good question for these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of momentum toward combining renewable energy and energy storage together. The idea of solar and storage together, replacing a peaker plant. There's actually an article in the Wall Street Journal about that today. So this is very real. It's very looked at. To your question about risks associated with energy storage devices obviously have to be designed right. They contain a lot of energy, so you have to design them safely. There are lots of codes and standards that have been developed. I think it's important to remember this is not brand new technology. We've been carrying it in our pocket for years. So it's bigger, there's a lot of it together. You have to design it right, you have to engineer it right, but there are ways to do that, and that's what's happening.
And the risk is fire with a lot of these like lithium-ion batteries, right? Because they're very high thermal. The risk is in electric vehicles. Thermal management is a key factor of maintaining these batteries. Maybe someday we'll have technology that doesn't have that issue, but it is very real, right? So following the rules is obviously important, and installing the right safety equipment. Every time I go get gas in the car, I see that you've got extinguishers, right? You're going to have that stuff. It also is important with new developers to make sure that the management team on site for the long term is committed to that, right? Because sometimes these new projects somebody will develop it and they'll sell it to somebody who operates it, and then it might end up in somebody else's hands or whatever. That's a public oversight. Your government public safety agencies have to pay attention to it. But
Carl, I think that they have proposed that this would be an unpersoned site. I'm trying to make it different.
yeah. Well, then it obviously needs to be subject to inspection and really good telemetry, right?
Getting back to the money that's involved, and this is the reason why this company is here, because of the incentive, okay? And it's really towards monetary funds for this company. So part of the scoping process for us is to come up with these questions, but also to come up with alternatives. And we are for something alternative, okay? But we have to make sure if we're going to come up with something alternative that it has to be something that's going to be comparable to the monetary value for this company. See, so they're coming up here because they're getting the land cheaper. They're going to be able to get the air permit, but they're going to be able to make $1 million a year.
They
Okay.
have the infrastructure set up.
Right. So this is a real cheap, good business deal for them. Okay. So how can we suggest an alternative that's going to be just as profitable. See, that's where that's what we're up against.
Yeah.
Well, this actually gets back to the lady's point over here about couldn't they just fill it up with solar? And no, the answer is probably not, because I don't think they're designing to run it off the battery. They're designing it, my guess is, I don't know, but my guess is they're designing to run it off the engine
Right.
with the battery as a backup smoother, value enhancer. So if they were running it off the battery, you know, like my old Chevy Bolt did, right? Where the only time the gasoline engine ever came on was to recharge the battery, and the car drove entirely on the battery. That'd be a different proposition. That, I don't think that's what's on the table
I
here.
don't think that's it exactly. I
Okay.
think they're putting the battery into the ancillary services market and the gas
Into the
engine
capacity.
into the capacity
Okay,
market.
so they're foregoing the capacity value if they lose the gas engine.
Exactly.
Okay, that's, well,
That's
that's
where the
good.
money
Okay,
is.
that's good. So then my one quick idea would be, I know some people in the mayor's office of sustainability in New York City, and I bet they could find 20 megawatts of capacity reduction faster and cheaper than this plant. So
See, and-
that's a little out of the box, but that's where, if that's where the problem is, right, that's theoretically creating this market opportunity, demonstrating that it would be far more economic to solve the problem at the place where the load is than to try to do it from way up here, might be a good way to start the conversation about economic comparability.
Okay, but see, now, we as lay people cannot have that conversation.
Well, can I just ask a question to cut to the chase? Is CLP planning to make comments during the public comment period in the draft scoping process? That would be question number one, and part of seeker requires an evaluation of reasonable alternatives,
Right.
which is something that we could use some help in identifying by groups like CLP and others, and I think, so do you have intentions to make comments during the public comment
I think we
period?
talked about how we were gonna make comments, whether it was gonna be group comments or, oh, sorry. We haven't gotten that far in terms of how we're gonna make comments in this process, or whether it's gonna be a group of organizations making comments. It actually depends on our capacity, or our very limited volunteer capacity. So, but we don't have this expertise ourselves. That's why we put this panel together. We would have to, draw on that expertise from our colleagues that are in this industry. There's someone, well, Tom?
Yeah. One quick question. You probably don't know this, but do we know what the megawatt hour capacity of the battery is? And then my other part was, is it possible, since we don't have the rules yet for the NISO, is there any pilot process we could perhaps move along that maybe we could shoehorn it into?
So I don't know the answer to the first part of about the project.
I think they're 4-hour batteries.
Okay.
Okay, if they are 4-hour batteries, that's 80 megawatt hours of batteries. Actually, I think they actually could participate in the capacity market the way the rules are right now. There's some risk of that changing because you need a 4-hour that's the minimum to participate. But the question about the pilot project, ISO actually right now has a pilot program open. There's some challenges with it with respect to the fact that they don't compensate for the first year. But they are working that through. So there are some ways the company could get involved in that. And I wouldn't necessarily give up on looking at the if it is a 4-hour battery. Then there might be a battery-only option they could be pursuing. And by the way, just a word of when you hear about these very big numbers for batteries, I just want to put this a little bit of perspective. You might have heard about the gas leaks in California about a year ago, the Wisconsin issues. when they had those gas leaks, they realized they had a big problem with peakers, because they were gas peakers. And so they had to do something quickly. And the thing they did quickly was got a lot of our member companies to build big battery systems. And they put them in within 6 months, over 100 megawatts of batteries to solve the problem. So this is stuff that's real and ready to go. So there's experience with those large battery systems. It's just a question of being able to get the rules right here in New York. So I would encourage looking at that big a battery to look at the switching over.
I mean, if it is the case that the rules allow for a storage-only project that can produce for 4 hours to bid in capacity markets, then that would be the route to take.
I mean, there might be issues with, they might be right on the hairy edge, and if they do anything else and they go 3 hours and 59 minutes, they're in trouble, and I mean, there's things that be considered. I don't want to say it's a done deal, but I would seriously consider it.
Yeah, I think it's that they think they can't participate in both the ancillary service market and the capacity market, and they're counting on both of those. So basically, if they draw on the battery at all, then they don't have the capacity when they call upon.
Well, perhaps they don't need to participate in all those markets.
Or make it a 4.5-hour battery.
Right, exactly, or increase the size of the battery system. So it's a little hard to know who would, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had a question about pollution. Those of us who live within 1,000 feet of the proposed plant, we're very concerned. I was thinking, we were extrapolating the 195 number to 17,000, and it's actually 30,000 metric tons a year. And what is the effect of pollution on the proximity to that plant? We have 140 homes that are a very, very tight community of townhomes and single detached or detached single-family homes. And you know, we're within feet.
600 feet.
620.
600 feet.
680 feet is the closest house, you know, to the site. There are many of us that are within 1,000 feet. But as I say, there are 140 homes. And they were talking about, you know, having two 100-foot stacks. And then they said, well, no, we'll bring that down. I'm thinking, you bring it down, you bring it a little closer to us. But, you know, I think they wanted to bring it down for the view shed, you know, that this wouldn't look as bad, but it would pollute more. But how do we get to the effect of that much emissions? And by the way, their Part 2 EAF does contain numbers, but it's greater than 1,000. You know, which tells you nothing. But how do we get to the effect of that level of pollution?
So we don't have that information yet because they haven't done their air study yet. So what they're apparently intending to do is, once they've got the draft scope or the scope in place, then they're going to do all their studies. And so they're gonna do the pollutant emissions study, I think, on the basis of what if we were operating 24/7,
Right.
and that'll give them a not to exceed number that'll be what goes on their permits. So I'm not actually familiar enough with the seeker process to know how much can be demanded in the scope, whether they just have to come up with those emissions numbers, or whether we can also ask for some modeling of how those pollutants are gonna disperse and what that's gonna do to the local air
You
quality.
can totally ask for that.
But we should ask for as much as we can possibly get, because that's really the question is, you know, the air here is so clean, there's no facility like this here, what is this gonna do? And I don't, you know, not having any of that information, I don't know whether this is big or small relative to the ambient pollution that we've got from, you know, the vehicles on the road and stuff like that.
And the lead agency can definitely, I mean, that's the purpose of the scoping. The lead agency can require that these studies be done. This is directly impacts the community.
Because the CO2 that we're talking about, you know, that just goes up into the atmosphere and mixes. So to, you know, best approximation, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from, but you know, the nitrous oxide, the carbon monoxide, that's all making smog right here. And we don't know anything about that from them yet.
Way in the back.
So about the alternatives analysis, SECRA is pretty clear that it's not just the alternatives on the site, but that they have to show alternatives elsewhere that can provide the same benefit despite whatever higher cost there might be on that site. So if it's an equivalent site providing the same access to gas and transmission lines, it happens to be in Westchester and costs 5 or 6 times as much to build it there, it's still something that has to be brought up in the alternatives analysis part of SECRA.
Thanks.
Going along with the emissions, Glide Pass the other night said that they were under a standard set by New York State. Do you know what that standard is that they're under, that allows them to make the claims that they're making?
I think what you're talking about, this is my slide about the counties. Depending on where you are, the threshold for whether you're major or minor is different. And so I think what they were saying was they're under the threshold for being a major air source because this is a clean county. And
Where do we find that level? And means the fact that they haven't, in the EAF, they haven't answered any questions about their total emissions. How do we even know what their total emissions are?
That I don't know.
That's going to be a very crucial crux for us folks that live in direct contact with this thing here. So we don't know what the limit is, or who sets that.
We can find out the limit from DEC. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay, and then,
But it's going to be important to take into account how long as Evelyn pointed out, what is the realistic operating time of the facility and
The numbers that we're talking about as far as emissions, that was under the assumption that the emissions were discharged during the operation fueled by gas. Now, as you know, there's a backup system in the event of disruption of gas service to be able to utilize oil. Diesel rather. I'm sorry. So where do these standards come into play? And how do you make a determination what that upper limit should be? Is it assuming that it's going to be powered by gas, or is it assuming that it's going to be powered by diesel for some period of time?
I think that as part of the scoping, you have to ask that the worst case scenarios are evaluated. Under the worst case, under maximum likelihood that diesel is going to be, used, that is what they should use to evaluate the potential impacts.
So for the purpose of scoping, we should make that abundantly clear that we want the determination made on the worst case scenario.
Yes.
Yeah, realistic worst case.
What are the standards? Are there standards for them to come up with these values? Is there a standard method that they have to use in order to come up with the emission values?
They're having an engineer do these studies. So I'm sure there are questions that could be raised about the methodology, but there are standard methodologies they'll be following.
Okay.
Right.
But should they make that transparent in their study?
They absolutely should. And what's going to be relatively easy for them to calculate again is how much the emissions are. What's harder to calculate is what's that going to do to the local air quality?
Right.
Because you have to model where those things go, what else is in the atmosphere, how the chemical reactions take place, and everything. And that's expensive to do, and we should ask them to do it.
And how about, obviously those emissions are going to be different in the summertime than in the wintertime.
Yeah, and
they're going to disperse differently.
It's going to be different. Yep.
You have to take all of that into account. And these are things you want to mention in the scoping comments, looking at seasonal variations and
So I sort of skimmed the draft scope and I had a couple of questions. I wondered if they were relevant questions to raise to the powers that be.
Probably not.
One is, it looks like the only alternative that they're suggesting studying is not doing anything, and I wonder if asking them to actually study a storage-only
Right.
facility would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, they have to look at they're required under seeker to look at the no action alternative.
So I wondered
But-
if we might suggest some other
Absolutely.
alternatives. And then the other one was, it looks to me like, I don't know if this is just them or if this is all of New York State, but the only place they mention carbon is in the air quality section. And it seems to me like climate change should be its own section. Is that a thing, or am I just making that up?
Well, it should be. Yeah, I mean, they are required in the, like, going back into the recesses of my brain about the type 1 EIS, but I do believe they are required to look at the carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions impacts specifically. So, you have to model that. That's all spelled out. So just to, if you all, it's really good to familiarize I missed, you may have heard this already, because I missed the Friday, I didn't go to the Friday meeting on the seeker scoping, but it's really good to familiarize yourself with the requirements of their environmental impact statement, what has to go into it. There's this very easy, great to reference called I think it's called the Seeker Cookbook. You can probably find online, but you have to look at those requirements and make sure that they're meeting them in their draft scope.
A couple disparate comments, I guess you could say. One, if it's a 4-hour battery, you're most likely looking at a flow battery, which has safer components and a safer technology than your typical lithium-ion technology, and what is becoming very quickly economical. As you pointed out to the article today, literally, that posed storage against peaker plants, literally. Part of the other things, I'm sure a number of people in here are long enough residents to remember the Town of Lloyd Con Edison nuclear plant. Yeah. Somehow Con Edison, who I worked with for a number of years on solar systems, one of the original installers in New York City, wanted to move up here because they realized that it was much easier to permit a plant up here than it was downstate. Local opposition stalled the process enough that made it non-competitive. There was another project that was interesting, kind of a renewable project that was a number of years back as well, and it was called the Catskill Creek Pump Storage Project. Open pump storage project. We'll pump a ton of water down to Catskills Creek, and then we'll pump it back up at night. Local opposition, scientific analysis of these things, financial analysis, people staying on the ball. New York Power Authority has a pump storage project, Gilboa Dam, if you're familiar with it. It's a closed-loop pump storage project. So both moving things around and a compromise that comes up with a more rational solution are very possible, especially in this case, where the economics are changing day by day on grid storage especially. No one's analysis, no one's numbers can keep up with the rapid decline in the cost and the rapid deployment of this technology. So that even, I won't call it a stalling technique, but a proper due diligence to a permitting process that incorporates all the things we're talking about tonight will put us in a position that's much more favorable to a storage only or a storage PV type of solution. Because despite the 201 things that are going on now, PV prices are not going up. The market's a little stalled, but they're not going up despite everything that's gone on with the IPC. Just some information on from someone who's been doing this for over 30 years.
Thanks, thank you for that.
Just one good question or suggestion for further study would be to ask for a cumulative impact analysis of the increased carbon emissions given CPV and Cricket Valley in the region in direct contravention of New York State's goals to reduce carbon emissions, and argue that that would be not in keeping with the public health and general welfare goals of the Town of Ulster's zoning laws, and back it up, ask for scientific data around that.
Thank you.
Sure. Actually, just following up on Seeker, Rebecca, do we know what the current deadline is for scoping comments?
March 22nd.
March 22nd.
But there could be more.
There could be
We're,
more.
we're advocating for more.
I have a question about supporting renewables. So you said that the curtailment avoidance is not currently a good argument, but if this thing does come to pass, can an argument be made that it will support new renewable integration versus the current situation where curtailment is not needed?
Yes, but by the time.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the question was, what I had said about GlidePath's argument that this project would support renewables, and I said, well, we're really not at the point where we need that here in New York State right now. We certainly could get there, and if we meet our ambitious targets, we could get there, but by then, it could very well be that storage only is a totally viable solution. And so we don't need to sort of pre-build fossil infrastructure when we know there's other flexibility resources that are going to be available. You know, by then we might have electric vehicles that are talking to the grid en masse. We might have viable water heaters that are talking to the grid. So there's lots of different ways to get flexibility on the system that don't involve turning on a gas generator. And it's good we're not at the point where we have to make that choice. And even in some place like California, where they are at the point where they're having curtailment, they are saying to their utilities, give us some storage only options.
Yeah, remember, it's the storage part that they're making the argument for saving the curtailment, and just one.
Well, no, actually, they're making it about the engine because it's more flexible than a combined cycle or a turbine.
Okay.
So
the curtailment, this discussion is coming. If you wind forward our 2030 renewable goals, have 50% renewable energy in this state. That, and I'm going to throw a couple numbers at you, but it's important to kind of understand this. We have an average power consumption, average power load of about 18 gigawatts in New York State. To get to 50% renewables, we're going to have more than 18 gigawatts of renewables, like around 20 or so. So and that's average power. In the spring and fall, we are down at a third of peak, so maybe around 10, 11 gigawatts types of numbers. So we would literally have close to double the amount of capacity of renewables as our low points in the spring and fall. So we will have situations where this matters by 2030. Now the question is, how do you deal with it? And I think Evelyn just pointed out there are lots of ways to deal with it. Energy storage is going to be really important, and there are parts of and forms of it that are really important to deal with it. And lots of other technologies are really important. You know, smart appliances, smart things that turn on and off that adjust, all kinds of other things, electric vehicles that may come in. There are a whole bunch of ways to deal with it. So I would encourage you to acknowledge going forward it is going to be an issue for us. And it's a good thing to have. It's a good thing to have too much renewables to have to deal with it, right? And then we have to have ways to do it. But I would really question, yes, the proximate plant does give you ability to move around, but key to curtailment is the ability to absorb power. And that the gas part doesn't do. It's the energy storage part that absorbs.
You had a follow?
Yeah, first of all, I'm coming down from Woodstock. Y'all are incredibly inspired, and it's really amazing to see the quality of the questions and comments that are being asked. My question has to do with what's the lifespan? What's the projected lifespan of this? Where's the return on investment? Where's the break-even point? What's the legacy implications of this plant once it's there and it's online? What does that mean with the rapidly changing price signals that you're referring to and the changing technologies?
Give a sense of the lifespan.
I think
20 years,
the lifespan of the generator, 15 to 20 years. The batteries could probably say better than me, 10.
Yeah,
It'll be longer than 15 years.
Yeah, I would expect generators much more than 15 or 20 years.
And my question really is not even so much about the lifespan of the particular equipment that they're going to install, but the lifespan of the site. Once they have built one of these things there, then when that generator reaches the end of its useful life, they just say, okay, well, we've got this site and we just come in and replace it. So
I mean, just on lifespan, we actually had a study commissioned to look at New York City peakers, because one of the things we believe is a pathway forward is to replace peakers with energy storage and combinations with renewables. And you've actually on our website, you can get that study and look at it. But you know, the most of the New York City peakers are past retirement age, but retirement age for many of them is 60 years. So these are not things that you put in and change in 10 years. You know?
I believe GuidePath said 20 years for this power plant.
What's the website that we can find that at?
New York West website, which is www.ny-best.org.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, hi. Does anybody know if this plant is going to make any noise? You know, because we're so close, our houses are so close to where,
And odor.
700 feet to our houses. Does anybody have an idea? Will it make
Yes,
noise?
I heard Peter Rude say at the neighborhood meeting that if he were a neighbor, his biggest concern would be the noise.
Well, that's good. I was at that meeting. I didn't hear
After the meeting when he was chatting with someone. Now, they're saying they're gonna put it in a building and you know, the building will block out the noise, but yeah, these things are loud.
Does your town have a noise ordinance?
We don't sleep good. I don't sleep good now.
Yeah, there is a noise ordinance, actually. Also, the odor that could come from the stacks. Okay, that's another concern that we have. I mean, this is all quality of life, you know, for our neighborhood, you know, and you know, the cost-benefit analysis has to really compare what the taxpayers are paying in this area, the 140 homes, compared to the value of our assessment is going to go down because of the noise, the smell, and the visuals, and
Right,
very
and
big.
you can, in the seeker, take into account things like impacts on community character and all of those kind of quality of life, you know, those should all be covered in the study.
Does anybody really believe that this plant will only generate 6 hours a day?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the whole idea is, this is not a supply and demand equation. That's ISO's problem. The business plan of any power plant, and new power plants are not peaker plants. They can't be constructed. They'll never get their costs paid for. Their object is not to bid into the capacity auction market, which pays a third of what the energy auction market is, which is producing electricity. If they claim, and they're pretty certain, that they can outbid existing power plants, that's their main competition. That's their main purpose, of undercutting an existing power plant, taking market share from existing power plants. They can achieve that because they're newer, more efficient, and a lower price in terms of the fuel compared to other older fossil fuel plants, be it gas, and coal's almost disappeared right now. So their business plan is really 24 hours a day, and count on that.
I don't think GlidePath really knows how much they're gonna operate this thing. I'm sure they've run some scenarios. They keep saying, we are not counting on earning money from selling electricity. We are counting on earning money from the capacity market and from the ancillary services market. And anything they earn in terms of energy, I think they're treating as extra. I think they have convinced themselves that the plant is economic even without the energy payments. That said, you're right, they probably will have winning bids some of the time and they will be selling power. I don't think they have any idea how much that's going to be.
I think the investors are going to have a real problem with them if that's their business plan and their own fiduciary responsibility, and they're going to get sued if that is their business model. But their object is to make money. And the way of the new plan is to make money in the energy auction market, and they will almost guarantee have their bid accepted every time. The capacity market really has not been, the so-called peak power has really not been accessed. So their model there is to sell the insurance policy and hope never to produce electricity for it and never to spend money on the fuel.
I can only tell you what they're saying. Of course, I haven't seen the number crunching for their business plan.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Look at what they're saying, what the reality is, and talk to the other power plants and how they're getting into the business, because This is so nonsensical, it's disturbing. And those living by, have your earplugs 24 hours a day at the ready.
Right, and again, like for the emissions impacts, you have to look at the worst case. You know, that it's running all the time.
For operational impact.
Right here,
Okay.
and then
All
Andy.
right, right after this meeting, I'm gonna be right over there. If anybody would like, we need some working committees on various issues, whether that's economics, or it's alternatives, or pollution rates. So we need to pull together, so I'm gonna be over there. So my question, though, has to do with safety. This plant is designed to be in the middle of the woods. It's 120 acres. They're gonna use six of those acres. And one of the things I said to Glide Path at the January 17th meeting was, I don't know why you want to be there in the middle of the woods. I mean, I know why you want to be there, because the land is cheap and you're near the gas conduits and the power lines. I get that part of it, but if this is an unpersoned, an unmanned facility, and if that's the case, a natural fire, dry year, could endanger your plant, which could be a disaster for our whole area. Or your plant could have a malfunction, since you're flying this or building this airplane while flying it. Your plant could have some sort of disaster that it could affect all of us in a very catastrophic way. You know, have you thought about that for your benefit? Because we've thought about it for our benefit. And this in many ways, this woods, although it has the power lines and the gas conduits, is a pristine area. And it has it's an archaeological site, and there's a lot of things going on there. But there's much that can go wrong, either from vandalism or just natural causes or accidents.
Right.
And you know, I don't know how we capitalize on something like that, but I think it's very serious.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can, in the scoping, you can address that in the community impacts. I mean, that's something you can raise as part of an issue and a potential community impact. Andy, and then in the back.
I'm just going to make a suggestion for people who are thinking about doing comments on the scope of work. The Glide Path website is wonderful for quotations about their business model and what they hope to achieve, and none of it has to do with fossil fuels. So I think that using their own words against them, if that's the term of use, is a wonderful way to do it, because they'll recognize the quotes, because their CEO said it to the Chicago Tribune. They're opposed to fossil fuel plants because their business model has to do with fluctuations of the grid handled by battery and backup storage. So I think those kinds of things make our comments much more effective and believable to the regulators, and lets the applicant understand this is a sophisticated group of people who have done their research.
I did that very thing with Peter Root, who's the COO of Glide Path, and I talked to him on the phone about this, and I said, I read I looked at your website and also your resume, and you're the COO of this project, and you have no experience at it.
Yeah.
And it's all renewables, and your company is all renewables. And he said this is an exciting business plan for us.
But that's so he's either a jerk or an incompetent.
There's a being disingenuous.
Disaster is exciting.
Yeah, we're talking about possible noise with the people that are very close, and those houses are all owned up there, those townhouses, those single detached homes that we just referred to. Are there any studies for neighborhoods around these plants, if they are in any kind of similar neighborhood, that says what this does to the value of these properties? Because if it's going to impact the quality of life in emissions, in noise, how attractive is that going to be for anybody to be able to sell their homes? And that's gonna have a huge impact on that community and probably the whole town.
So, I mean, I don't know that answer to that question, but I would suggest, this is a research project, but there are other much bigger gas-fired power plant projects that have been built or are, and these communities, these studies may have been done. I mean, you have to look at what information, what research has been drawn on in the seeker process in projects like this, and what can you learn from their seeker review process. I think that's probably a really good first place to start. I mean, I personally have never been involved in a seeker process on a project like this. I mean, Town of Rosendale, we haven't had any gas-fired land.
And can I just say one thing before everybody leaves? If you're here from the Town of Ulster, if you're a Town of Ulster resident and you have not signed the petition asking for the 90-day scoping period, I have it here. Please see me and sign it. Thank you.
Yeah, regarding that issue about taxes, I know many years ago in the Woodstock area, we were involved in a suit with the town and the DEC about Rotron. And Rotron was a corporation there near the golf course that had been dumping chemicals into the soil, and it polluted the groundwater, and there was a plume. So different homes were the wells were being poisoned. And the DEC wasn't being helpful. They were really kind of in bed with Rotron, who was a big employer. And the town of Woodstock wasn't really being very helpful either. So we finally hired a lawyer as a group of citizens, and we got their attention when we told the town, all these people, we don't want to be paying the taxes we're paying because you've lowered the value of our property. So once the town board...
It was a class action suit.
Yeah, it was a class action suit that we brought, but basically that got everyone's attention because we got together and said, all these houses, we're not paying the taxes we've been paying because you've lowered the value of our property if we can sell it at all. And that got their attention.
So we had a lawyer, and that finally is what moved it into the direction of remediation. They had no intention of going that way.
Right, they finally settled with us. And they remediated, and they tested, and they started excavating contaminated soil, and so we didn't get anywhere until we told the town we're not paying our taxes.
Well, definitely attorneys help. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, it's 9. You know what? I'm looking at our broken clock. I'm sorry. We do have to wrap this up.
One quick comment. I'd like to thank whoever put this together. This was a very great meeting.
And our questions were excellent.
And at the same time, even though you're not a Town of Ulster resident, I am, it's in my backyard, but the public comment for scoping is open to everybody. The air pollution will affect the people in the city of Kingston and Sorges. So please, all these questions tonight were really great. Put them down on a piece of paper, get them over to Mr. Quigley in that office, make a copy and have the clerk stamp them received. Get your comments in this scoping document. It's the only way we're going to really dampen this project. Thank you so much, and thank you folks for coming. Great job.